The Hail Varsity Radio Saturday Morning Show, presented by the Nebraska Lottery. Strap yourselves in. Here are your hosts, Chris Schmidt.
Y'all don't even know he was a virgin until he's 28, and now, roll tide.
And Mark Cranack.
Time has come for someone to put his foot down. And that foot is me.
Welcome to it. Weekend editions here at Hail Varsity Radio, presented by the Nebraska Lottery. Chris Schmidt, Mark Cranack, Elijah Herbal. We are rolled up and ready for the week that's been, the weeks to come, with the reshaping of college football. And, oh, yeah, by the way, have an incredible 4th of July holiday with friends and family and barbecues. And we're here the next couple of hours to dive into the incredible news of the week, and that is expansion in the Big Ten, and try and figure out a timeline as to when and where the Big Ten stops their acquisitions. Number to get in. You can find us also on social media this morning with Hail Varsity. Email the show too, Chris at HailVarsity.com. Stream us, ESPNLincoln.com. And the Twitter handles at Schmidt_radio, Chris Schmidt. That's me at Herbal Essence for Elijah Herbal. Mark Cranack. Someday we'll get back on social media. We say good morning to Mr. Mark Cranack. How's your pup doing with all the fireworks going off?
Yeah, not too bad, actually, but it's probably because I haven't been around that much to know whether it's destroying him or not.
Okay.
I went and watched Top Gun again last night.
Nice.
Top Gun 2, and could not take the dog. How was Carolina, though? For those that don't know, Schmidt was in North Carolina, accepting the Nebraska Sportscaster of the Year award, shamelessly taking photos with Charles Barkley.
Listen.
And I'm assuming others. That's the only one I saw. But I know there was some fanboying going on, and
listen,
I'm not hating on it.
No. I talked to Chuck about Nebraska because his dear friend
we're on a Chuck name basis now.
His dear friend is Jabba Chamberlain. All right, so there's the connection point. Chuck's the best dude in the world, publicly and privately, legit. He's very genuine and awesome, and he's giving you time. I am really anti-fanboy, and that everyone's like, BS. Seriously, I am. My wife, and you remember Audrey, Cousin Dino's wife. My dad and Cousin Dino are gone, but not ever not with me. That was a big kind of focal point of this past weekend, getting the award because of all the support and love and advice and just mentorship and to loved ones. My dad, my dad for years, and this was for him, and this was for Dino. Dino was always a big supporter of my career, and Audrey was kind enough to drive out from Bryson City, North Carolina, to be with us. So the long and short of it is Audrey and Aaron went chuck hunting for a picture. Okay. So there's kind of a red carpet thing where you take the picture, and then there's Charles, and there comes Audrey and my wife sneaking up behind Chuck, phone in hand, and they said, "Hey, let's get a picture." And then at the end of the awards ceremony, my wife's literally throwing people out of the way. It's like, "You're getting a picture with Charles." Like, I'll talk to him. I don't know if he wants to talk to me. And that's how the picture happened. But he was awesome. He's like, "What's going to happen with Nebraska? What's up with my boy Frost? I'm a big Frost fan." I was like, "Well, Chuck, why don't you get up here for Oklahoma? We'll get you a tea time somewhere, Wilderness Ridge, and you can go see your friend Scott Frost for real." And so we're working on that.
Planting that seed. Okay.
We're working on that. But you're very kind, Cranack. You've been with me from day one. I love you much, and we've had so much fun together with just being able to tag team this thing. Saturday mornings and high school football with Cox TV with you and KRNU, man, way back post Nebraska-Tennessee Orange Bowl. So it's been a long time, but it was really awesome. Ernie Johnson was wonderful. He handed out the award. Scott Van Pelt was there to hand out a induction plaque to the Stuart Scott family, which was really cool. Scott Van Pelt was really gracious with his time, and the Scott family was great. So Dave Gorin, who puts this on, he's sideline man for Wake Forest and a professor at Wake Forest. He is incredible with this organization and all that they do. I mean, it's the NSMA is really fabulous for broadcasters, and they did a great job too with seminars with people in college and folks that are young professionals, having folks that have really done well in the business spend their time and offer their insight as to the new world, which is what we're going to transition back to with college football, because it is a new world of realignment. USC, UCLA is now part of the Big Ten. And, Kranak, this is incredible, and I put it back into the Nebraska context with thinking about where Nebraska would be without 50 years of great football. Think about where Nebraska football would be without initial success that Trev Alberts mentioned. He had a sit-down with Sip and Sam McEwen on Friday with where, he was right on. He's like, look where Nebraska football is now. Look where Nebraska football was when they first transitioned into the Big Ten, giving credit to the Sioux years and Pelini. And look where it's at now. Look where it's trying to get back to, right? And it would be a tough sell, whether you're going 8-4, 9-3, even if you were hypothetically still back in the Big 12, not going 4-8, 3-9 into the Big Ten. How it's just gone from tough to really tough the last few years. I mean, Nebraska would be on the outside looking in, except for that brand build that Devaney and Osborne put together, the greatness, the decades, the fact that your eyeballs in this state and across the country as Nebraska alum and fans, they matter, and they still make a monster dent when it comes to, hell yeah, we want Nebraska. It's not an issue now, but it could have been if things weren't put into motion 12 years ago to jump ship and get some security. And think about this. Think of John Wooden. Think of UCLA. Think of Bill Walton. Think of Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. Think of 10 championships in a 12-year span. Think of making reservations every year for the Final Four. That's UCLA basketball. And of recent, a Sweet 16 and a Final Four with Mick Cronin. UCLA is making a phone call as a flagship member of a conference to join the Big Ten. USC, think of the Carroll years. Think of John Robinson. Think of Marcus Allen. Think of the greatness that is USC football and the brand. And they go get Lincoln Riley, and they're making a phone call, Kranak, to the Big Ten. Bro, we think we can bring some value for your TV negotiation rights. We fit academically. The whole geography thing, we'll figure it out. Can we join your league, bro? That's what happened, and that's incredible. And it's been a 180 on the pinata that is Kevin Warren, because for him to pull this off is monstrous. It's awesome, and it's not stopping right now. It's recess football. Who are you picking next? Who are you inviting? What do you want on your team? There's somebody in South Bend. There's somebody in Oregon. Maybe Washington. Maybe you don't stop. Maybe you don't stop at 20. Maybe you go to 24. Maybe you get to that 30 or 32 number, and you have an AFC and an NFC of college football here in 5 years. It
seems like it, and because if you're in the Big 12 or the ACC right now,
or Pac-12,
you're in the Pac-12, of course. You're just. It just there's no way, right? You just look ahead and you realize that pretty much all the behemoths are in one of two conferences, right? That's just all there is to it. They're in the Big Ten or they're in the SEC. Will they continue to be called that? I don't know. But seriously, picture yourself if you are a middle to upper echelon program in the ACC, for instance. Proud history or not, right? But if you're like a Virginia or a Duke or a North Carolina, right? Basketball butters the bread there. Everybody understands that. But football generates the most money, period.
Yes.
You can't even argue about that. So what do you do if you're them, right? You're just going to stand pat in the ACC and then watch as potentially Florida State, Miami head on to the SEC. Then what do you do, right? It's just very clear there are only two conferences that are on the rise and everybody else is not. They're just not. And it's going to upend absolutely everything. It's going to have impacts on the playoffs. It's going to have impact on just the theory of conferences as we know them in the first place. Because they call them super conferences, but it could be divisions. And what is that number going to be? And it's going to have to – they're going to have to work together. I don't get the sense that the Big Ten and the SEC are like working together. I think they've both kind of been in a bit of an arms race, but I think now you sit here and look at each other and you're like, oh, we are by far the biggest, baddest dudes on the block, and everybody wants to be us. What do we do about this? What do we do about that? And if you're USC and UCLA, I know people might thumb their nose a little bit at the travel thing, but it's significant.
It is.
Like what those two just signed up for? Like, what? I mean, Nebraska is your nearest competitor. That's like a 3-hour flight.
Here's what's not going to happen. Wow. Okay, I mean, Nebraska was brought in because they are a monster brand and people watch them. Okay, good, bad, ugly season. Nebraska still moves the needle. USC and Nebraska, what's the schedule been like since they joined the Big Ten? They've had Michigan or Ohio State every year, which hasn't gone well on the field, but that's why you go get a Nebraska, because you want a Michigan-Nebraska or Michigan-Ohio State, Nebraska-Ohio State matchup, right? You want those sexy throwback matchups that you only used to get once in a great while, non-conference, and you have a chance to do that on a regular basis now. USC and UCLA are gonna get brought in, and it's gonna be what you've always watched on January 1 in the Rose Bowl. It'll just be in September. You're going to get Michigan, USC. You're going to get Ohio State, USC. And if you add Notre Dame to this party, they play half the schedule anyway with their Big Ten and other rivalries. So that's just more of your calling card when we talk about, all right, the arms race that is the SEC versus the Big Ten. Well, you can differentiate yourself with some really incredible matchups, along with then working together to put the best product forward, because you've got to figure out NIL, you got to figure out payer payment, and you've got to have a college football czar. I mean, those are all next steps when you have these two mega conferences to streamline it and make it the best. I mean, what's going to get you into the club, so to speak, is market size and what kind of value can you bring as this investment. You're going to get upwards of over $100 million a year to be in each league, the SEC and the new Big Ten. Are you going to be a riveting football program that is high level, or are you just going to be there to collect the check? That's kind of the next thing. Do you start weeding some out that aren't carrying or paying rent? Not initially, but that's what Barnett was talking about yesterday. That's a concern for some schools.
Maybe. I find it hard to believe that they would be looking to cull. You would have to be a really offending program to do that, to get kicked out.
Well, tell me, what happens, say, 8 years down the road, when Lance Leipold has built Kansas into a football contender? They're already a basketball contender, and they're sitting in the remnants of the Big 12, and you're sitting here with, name a Big 10 team that just can't handle the likes of USC and UCLA.
Most,
exactly. So you look at that and you go, well, now Kansas is a powerhouse in football and basketball in this hypothetical situation.
Do you not drop a team to add? We're not going to speak on hypotheticals because Lance Leipold will be the Nebraska coach by then. So it's like the way we're not going to, we can't.
We can't go there.
Yeah, we can't go there. He's going to be at Nebraska. What are you talking about? No, you're right, though. But it'll cut off at some point. Here's another thing. Can you imagine that USC and UCLA didn't get some assurance that they're going to get a couple more local universities in the mix so that they could have some sense of a normal travel?
I don't think you're asking for convenience right now. I think you're asking for safe harbor.
I get that, but do you think they make that jump completely with zero assurances that there's going to be like a Stanford?
No, I think that they're hedging their bets. You're waiting on the you're waiting on the Notre Dame answer, okay? And then I think you go add whoever you want and qualifies and can bring something to the party. Stanford and Washington TV market size do, on top of the fact they've been. Stanford hasn't for recency, but they're always kind of there. And then you bring the Tech and San Francisco combination, no brainer. I mean, it's prestigious. It's incredible. Same with Washington. It's
in all sports.
Too. Yeah, and Oregon, and I mean Oregon's with the Nike brand, and as good as they've been in football and basketball, you got to do it. What's going to throw a wrench into that, Cranack and Elijah, is the state level trying to keep Oregon State and Washington State tied to the hip with the other two public universities that will no doubt be getting a better offer from somebody. If you have a combination of a Pac-12, Big 12 remainder, right, that's an option. But overall, you need to be able to make your own call as Washington, as Oregon, and not have to worry about your little brother.
Look, they're not above taking little brother programs, though. Let's be honest. Rutgers and Maryland have very little prestige in just about any
They have
sport.
Washington, D.C. and New York.
They've opened up TV markets. I mean,
they do. Well, but if that's the cost for opening up, say, Portland or Seattle, I don't think that I don't think the Big Ten would be too concerned. But, either way, it's a boon for other sports, too. And you think about the ripple effects it'll have. Like basketball, it'll just kind of, basketball conference is going to be awesome now. It already is pretty good.
Yeah, you're already getting 9 in. I mean, 8 or 9 in, you're going to get 2 more. Do you stop just at the West Coast, Mark, or do you go fishing in the ACC? I mean, you're already coast to coast now from Jersey Shore to Hollywood. Do you go look at North Carolina, that brand? You mentioned Virginia and Duke. I mean, Virginia's a prestigious institute that has some history, but, they've been trying to figure things out. I think the SEC raids your Clemson and Florida State and Miami's.
Probably. Yep.
So
yeah, no, I think it makes sense to add North Carolina, Duke, Virginia, Stanford, Notre Dame, Oregon, Washington. Like, yeah,
just go get them all.
At this point, I think Colorado's got a good shot too. For as much as we like to make fun of them, pretty good school,
really good school.
And then geographically, it would make sense to not leave USC and UCLA like so much of an outpost. I'm interested in what this is going to do to sports like baseball. In particular, baseball. I was just immediately thinking of that. So you got UCLA, who becomes
your
USC
favorite,
probably the top historical program,
yeah.
But UCLA becomes the top program of the just day one.
Well, it beefs up, buddy. It's no longer a 2-bid league or a 3-bid league in the Big Ten.
But even scheduling wise, what happens there, and then what is that? How does the rest of the conference respond to somebody like a UCLA coming in? So USC and UCLA coming into the conference football wise, while intriguing, I don't think necessarily changes what you do as a program. You're just sort of like, bring it. Let's go. See if you guys can deal with trench warfare every week, right? Like, you're ready for that. You're committed. Basketball, you're just like, okay, USC and UCLA, like, let's go. You know, we send teams to the Final Four. We send 8-9 teams to the dance every, like, let's go. Baseball, though, there's not an equivalent to UCLA, and historically not an equivalent to a USC in that conference. Like, that's a game changer. So I think the institutions themselves are going to have to figure out, like, do you just want to get swept by UCLA like every week? Because that's what's going to happen if we don't.
If you don't get better,
seriously figure out what we're doing baseball wise. Like, start to invest some money. And by the way, that money's going to be there.
Oh, big time.
So you can actually do it. Yes, it's better as a warm weather sport or whatever, but come on now, facilities, NIL, all of that. You can make something happen, because UCLA just walks right in as the best baseball program in the conference, bar none. Like, hands down, especially with Michigan coach taking off to Clemson. They're going to take a step back,
which is
now.
Huge. Yeah. Well, no, I mean, there are some advantages that the two newbies will have, and there's a whole lot of adjustment they'll have when it comes to style of ball and what type of offensive and defensive lines are you recruiting. I mean, we tried to cover all corners this week with it, and you get the Notre Dame perspective from Kaz, playing against USC all those years. And when they're right, I mean, they are as good as anybody with their talent pool in the backyard of lines of scrimmage. I mean, there's been a lot of defensive linemen from USC that are in the league, right? Same with the offensive line historically.
Under Carroll.
Yes.
Basically.
But the Lincoln Riley's got to figure it out now. I mean, he thought he was going to another Big 12 stylistically figured out, schemed league. Well, you're coming to the Big 10 here in 3 years. So,
well, yeah, and they need to. It's going to test that theory, because I think everybody's said that had that theory where it's like, well, the Big 10 on a single game basis, that's one thing, but over the course of a season, totally different thing because of the trench warfare and the attrition. This will put that to the test, because UCLA and USC are very Pac-12 schools. They're very much in that style. Like, they are not some physical bunch that is going to impose their will on you. Like, nope. That ship sailed when Pete Carroll left.
Oh, big time.
Right? So it's going to test that theory. USC is uber talented, obviously, and they're going to be even more so under Lincoln Riley going forward, but it's going to test that. Like, is that just what Big Ten fans say to justify not performing well in the playoffs? Do we just say that? Is it to justify not being an elite, not having a lot of elite teams outside of Ohio State? Is just that, it's just the week-to-week grind. Like, we'll see. We'll see. USC and UCLA joining is going to really put that to the test. My personal opinion is that it is true, and that USC and UCLA are going to struggle early. And it's going to take them a little bit to figure out, like, oh, crap, we really do need linemen. and they need to be grown men, and we do not have that right now. They'll get the occasional pass rusher. They'll get the occasional good talent. I'm not saying they don't have any of that. But in terms of just depth across the board, straight up girth, size, ability to withstand that long season when you have back-to-back Wisconsin, Iowa, Michigan, Ohio State, something like that, let alone the travel, let alone the cold weather that they're not used to. Like, it's going to be a huge adjustment for those guys football-wise.
It's Mark Cranack, Chris Schmidt, Elijah Herbal, Weekend Edition, Hail Varsity Radio, Conference Realignment. Let's dive into the recruiting aspect of this. Bill Doleman's our rewind, as Bill has done TV across the country for a long time and loves playing the musical chairs game of realignment. So we'll reconnect with him in about 8 minutes or so. Hurrdat, when you think of recruiting the West Coast, who's the one Husker recruit in your football life that is your Nebraska-California connection? Who's the California kid you always think of?
LP,
yeah.
Ralph Brown. Lawrence Phillips and Ralph Brown. That goes way back, I know. In more recent times, Ricky Tenars.
Okay, I think of Quincy Enunwa. That's my recent.
Yeah.
My generation thinks of Adrian Martinez.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Even Eric, special teams, Eric Martin.
Yep.
He was from that same area as Quincy Enunwa.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's been quite a few. Nebraska's struck gold there.
Roy Halou.
Times. Oh, right?
Mm-hmm.
Taylor Martinez. I mean, honestly, some of the
Steve
bigger
Taylor.
names.
I mean, I go way back. I think it's Steve Taylor, man.
Yeah, Derek Brown's from that area.
Derek Brown, yeah.
Some of the bigger names in
Brendan
Nebraska
Sty.
lore. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, some of the bigger names in Nebraska lore are from there. Doesn't mean they all work out, obviously. Keyshawn Johnson Jr., hello. They don't all work out, but, man, that's been a region that has been pretty good to Nebraska overall. There's been some real stars that have come out of there.
You hit on the right California kid. He has been the perfect complement on one side of the ball or the other, and a monster difference maker. You talk about Ralph, started as a freshman. You look at LP, as great as he was on the field, and then Brendan Sty he was incredible in Lincoln, and then a wonderful pro career.
Abdul Muhammad, Riley Washington.
Yeah, and you know what? I look at Abdul, and that dude brought a absolute toughness to Nebraska. Great receiver. I loved watching Abdul play. And he was a big time get from Nebraska, probably their first dude from Compton. And just kind of the mentality, the work ethic, just the attitude he brought really helped kind of flip things in that 1990 recruiting class. So this is a great thing. But Nebraska's not, aside from Adrian, Nebraska's not been hitting a lot of home runs in California. And I don't want to get into the argument if Adrian was a home run or not. I'm just saying he was a guy who started a lot of years for you and did some good things, and but just ultimately didn't win enough.
He was a
Factor.
factor.
Thank you. Then don't
You're
forget
looking for factors.
And then Taylor Martinez. Don't forget about T Magic. He was a California get as well. So, we talk about the 500-mile radius in recruiting for Nebraska, the emphasis on Texas now with Coach Applewhite, what he can do there, the regional recruiting that Bill Bush is 1,000% locked in on. Of course, Mickey Joseph, and what Mickey's going to try and do in Lincoln and Omaha and the Metro as well. That's incredible. But now, who's going to be your ace in the recruiting world out in California? And Scott Frost has recruited California when he was at Oregon, obviously. So there's that. You have Raiola with the Polynesian connection. There's that opportunity, but this is a door that's not been closed, but let's just say it's been cracked. Maybe now it's opened a little more with UCLA and USC coming to the Big Ten.
It's exposure for the Big Ten, and Nebraska can say that they're closest school to California. That'll help.
Mark Hurrdat, Chris Schmidt, Elijah Herbal. Hail Varsity Weekend. We'll rewind. Bill Doleman on Conference Realignment. Gary Sharp, the Iron Horse, in an hour. Brandon Vogel back from the beach. That's on the way with Hail Varsity. Like what you hear? High-quality radio and podcast is part of what we do at Hail Varsity. Hey, it's Chris Schmidt with Hail Varsity Radio, and I wanted to offer listeners of the Hail Varsity Radio Show podcast $10 off the price of an annual subscription. That means that you can get everything we do. 10 issues of our monthly magazine, our annual football yearbook, and all the premium content we produce at HailVarsity.com. Just go to HailVarsity.com/subscribe and enter in the promo code GBR for $10 off a full year of Hail Varsity. That's HailVarsity.com/subscribe, promo code GBR.
Now back with Hail Varsity Radio, presented by the Nebraska Lottery, with Chris Schmidt and Mark Cranack.
We'll check in with Bill Doleman right now. The pride of Fairbury. His hair is combed. He has already made the trip to Mexico for illegal fireworks, and he is now everyone's favorite dude in the neighborhood. Billy D, happy 4th. How are you?
Happy 4th to you. I was just in Boulder explaining the ways of the big sky to the folks there, and talking about what it's going to be like for northern Colorado and CU and all those schools to get together.
Well, I remember when Colorado and Colorado State would always play at the old Mile High, you needed to roll in with a gas mask because there would be several fights and tear gas would be dispersed. That wouldn't be a great thing. I want to get your thoughts here back on Nebraska and this expansion. We talked yesterday. Thanks for your insight on TV and what next shoe drops. If you were asked, how would you go about the scheduling piece of this in the future? Because on the docket in the future, you've got home and homes with Colorado, Tennessee's kind of around the corner, and you're wrapping up Oklahoma. So what do you do moving forward? If this thing grows enough, do you just play everybody in the league because it was going to be a non-conference game anyway, or do you still try and venture out and play somebody from the old Big 12 or somebody from the new or old SEC or ACC? How do you go about this first and foremost administratively?
You know what? I don't know. I was thinking about that last night after we got done with the show. It's almost as though these two conferences are going to get so big that they're going to have conferences, not divisions, conferences within the conference, where you have, 6 teams in your conference that you have to play every year. And there are going to be years where you may not see somebody else in your league for 3 or 4 seasons. And that's not too out of what we've got going on right now with, when was the last time Rutgers was in Lincoln? Like 2015 or something like that. Nebraska hasn't been there very often. But, that to me is Kevin Warren and Greg Sankey, the commissioners of the Big Ten and the SEC, respectively, saying, you guys figure it out. And, they are hiring smart people to figure out scheduling, figure out logistics, all of that, and who else they're going to partner in to the league. But to be honest with you, that's why they've got a couple of years before there's full membership for those schools. And I'm guessing that those at the highest levels could care less about that headache right now. All they care about is who's going to fill out the remaining couple of spots in the 2 big conferences. And they could care less. And I will say this. I hate to admit it, but I think I may have been somewhat in error yesterday when I thought that they would probably keep the ACC intact. I think the ACC is probably calling the Pac-12 and the Big 12 and trying to figure out how do we adapt. How did you guys cope? I think they're probably in some group counseling session together, and the ACC is the new member. Because I really think that this is I think we're headed to what I did say yesterday, Clemson, FSU, Miami, going to the SEC. Big Ten's going to get Notre Dame, and then whomever else they want to take from the Pac-12. And however they schedule it, that's not the issue for the day.
Bill Doleman's with us, Pride of Fairbury, NBC Sports, at Bill Doleman on Twitter. Bill, what would you like to see with Nebraska's permanent rivalries, and that was a discussion point the last 7 to 10 days, right? Well, you keep Iowa, you keep Wisconsin, you have Minnesota, and then everything else you can kind of rotate through. Do you want to see SC or UCLA as permanent, because they're not really, but they're kind of your neighbor? You were the furthest most west outpost. Now they are, but you're in the middle. And a lot of great history with UCLA. It's been a while since you played SC, except for the bowl game in the Holiday Bowl in 2014. But I'd love to see one of the two California schools yearly on Nebraska's schedule, and then you rotate Michigan and Ohio State. But keep Iowa and keep Wisconsin for sure.
Well, you have to have some semblance of a stable rival, which is why the Big 12 went south when it first happened, saying no more Nebraska, Oklahoma. If that had happened, Nebraska would still be in the Big 12, and maybe none of that. Well, this is probably still happening, but Nebraska would be, partnered up with Oklahoma and Texas probably. But you have to maintain, whether Iowa wants it or not. Nebraska and Iowa is a natural rivalry. It's perfect for Black Friday in November, and everybody's got to just realize that that's the way it's going to be, and there's some naturalness to it. If you go back to the old Big 8 days, Nebraska had, good Saturday rivalries with everybody that they played. Kansas State, Oklahoma State, and all that. But there really was kind of that midseason rivalry with Missouri, right? So you've got to have something like that has some stability, that, it's that midseason game that's it's going to be black and blue. And I think that probably comes with Wisconsin, maybe Minnesota. And how happy is PJ Fleck that USC and UCLA joined the conference to kind of erase him from the headlines for a day.
Oh, he'll find a way.
Well, but I think that you've got to have Iowa and Wisconsin, and I think there's a naturalness to Minnesota, Northwestern. I saw that I had seen what you had sent me with the 4-team. The 4 divisions within the Big Ten. Yep. There was one that had 4, which, I was having a conversation with a friend of mine today that how do you round out with a team that's going to make sense if you're going to go to 20? And do you remember back when the Big 12 was formed and Baylor got in? And everybody's like, how in the world is Baylor in and not Houston, the largest TV market in Texas and all that? Governor Ann Richards saw to it that Baylor got in and Houston was out. Look, Syracuse is not a major market by any stretch of the imagination, but I would venture to say that 75% of the major TV power brokers in this country are Syracuse grads. Mm-hmm. And they are going to be doing all they can to convince the powers that be that Syracuse should be in the Big Ten if the ACC is going to get dismantled. It doesn't make a lot of sense. No. Did Nebraska make much sense? Yes, it did, because Nebraska's a brand. But in the world of television, Syracuse is a major player because of how many people are alums that work in television in New York. And don't be surprised if there's some people pulling those kinds of strings saying Syracuse should be in as opposed to somebody else.
Bill, potentially Syracuse coming, or Duke, or Stanford, or Oregon, Washington. The list goes on and on. I don't think anyone thinks the Big Ten is done. And with this many teams in the conference, obviously adding new TV markets and adding new teams is going to drive more revenue from that TV rights deal. But do you think we're coming to a point where the college football season is going to get expanded? That's a great way to add more revenue, add more games. Do you think you could see a 14-game college football slate coming somewhere down the road?
I don't know if we're going to go, the health of the player and the wealth of the player are very big topics of conversation. If you play more games, you're going to have to pay them. And I said yesterday, there are people that are behind the scenes right now trying to figure out a way to get into a college football labor market. And you're going to hear talk of unions. I just know that's going to happen. But I don't know how you can go to a 14-game schedule if you're still going to have playoffs, and you're going to have playoffs within the conference if you have 4 divisions. You probably have the division winners meet, and then the winners of those games will meet, and then you'll have 3 playoff games within the conference itself. and then probably a college Super Bowl between the SEC and the Big 12. And as charity, they'll give tickets to the Big 12, ACC, and Pac-12. You guys can come watch if you want. Or here's your EA Sports, memento. So I could see 2 bye weeks that elongate the season that way. But I just can't imagine that they're going to ask players to play that much more when health is such a concern.
I'm interested to get your thoughts on, once this explosion happens and Notre Dame declares and Miami and Florida State and Clemson declare the leftover, and there's good coaches, good programs, good kids, there's potentially a third league. So who's the strongest conference right now that could duct tape together a league and survive? Is the ACC going to absorb the remnants of the Pac-12, or the Big 12? Is the Big 12 going to be brought into the fold with what's left over, who doesn't get in behind the old velvet rope, a Studio 54? Those that have been excluded, who can rally and at least start their own kingdom? Which of the leagues?
Look, I think that those 3 conferences are going to, like I said, I thought yesterday the ACC might be protected, but nobody cares about. I'm finding out more and more as I talk. Mm-hmm. As romantic as college basketball is in Duke and North Carolina, they'll preserve that rivalry one way or the other. But I think you're going to have the power brokers in those 3 conferences saying, okay, which 16 to 20 teams out of the rest of us are going to make us viable, and are we going to be willing to subsidize those that aren't? And so like a TCU, which did everything it could to get into the Big 12, and maybe a Baylor or a BYU or Central Florida, Cincinnati, I think at some point they're going to go, okay, what are our big TV markets? And those of you that aren't in big TV markets or have any branding value to us whatsoever, we're just sorry. We got this happen to us, so we're going to have to do it to you. And we will send out, letters of recommendation to the AAC, the Mountain West, the Big Sky. I was kidding about it yesterday, and I'm starting to think, you know what? There might be some, I think that what's left of those 3 conferences, they're going to try and take their best brands that they possibly can and try to sew something together. But it will be in no way, shape, or form as lucrative or command the attention of the money that the Big Ten and the SEC are doing. And Notre Dame is just going to have to play now. It's over. They need to come to the realization that they can no longer be independent. You can keep your NBC contract and the millions it brings, but you are going to be in a conference. That's just the way it's going to be for you. Or you can go join the ACC, and you do that, and we're going to take Syracuse, Pittsburgh, Clemson, Florida State, and Miami. And that's that conference you'll be in, Notre Dame.
And you won't have anyone to play because everyone else
and you won't have any. Or you can go to the Big East. I hear there's a couple of kittens that are running free right now trying to get into a conference, and their names are Kansas and West Virginia because they have decent basketball programs. So, they might be at the doorstep of the Big East Conference right now. That I would not. I bet Kansas is trying to get into the Big Ten, but I would not doubt if they're not headed for the Big East to be a part of a good basketball conference with Creighton and teams like that.
Got about a minute here. How embarrassing is it for what Oregon's become to be told to go to timeout along with Washington? We're waiting on Notre Dame, per Dennis Dodd's report by the Big Ten.
Well, I don't think he's out. He's too far to left field. But if Notre Dame comes in, then you still have to add. If you're going to get to 23, then they're going to have to add 2-3 more teams. And I still think Stanford has to be in that mix because of the San Francisco market, the academics that it brings. And I get the AAU stuff, and you've got to have that declaration for your academics. Can I buy a vowel with $100 million I'm going to get? Okay, so Nebraska's not in the AAU or whatever. They're a brand that's important to the Big Ten. Stanford's got a brand. But, yeah, Oregon just not in a big TV market. The same with Washington's in a big market in Seattle, but you better just be glad that you're on the list to maybe get into the club.
Bill Doleman, proud of Fairbury, NBC Sports. Bill, have a great weekend. Happy 4th, buddy. Thanks for the time this week.
Go Big Red, and thank God for Tom Osborne and the move that was made so many years ago.
Amen to that. That's Bill Doleman. A quick timeout. Coach Kaz on the way.
Like what you hear? High-quality radio and podcasts are just part of what we do at Hail Varsity. I'm Brandon Vogel, managing editor. I wanted to offer listeners of the Hail Varsity Radio Show podcast $10 off the price of an annual subscription. That means that you can get everything we do, 10 issues of our monthly magazine, our annual football yearbook, and all of the premium content we produce at hailvarsity.com. Just go to hailvarsity.com/subscribe and enter the promo code GBR for $10 off a full year of Hail Varsity. That's hailvarsity.com/subscribe, promo code GBR.
The Hail Varsity Radio Saturday Morning Show, presented by the Nebraska Lottery. Strap yourselves in. Here are your hosts, Chris Schmidt.
Y'all don't even know he was a virgin until he's 28, and now, roll tide.
And Mark Cranack.
Time has come for someone to put his foot down. And that foot is me.
Welcome back. It's Hour 2. It's the weekend edition, Hail Varsity Radio, presented by the Nebraska Lottery. Chris Schmidt, Mark Cranack, Elijah Herbal. We've got Cranack for a little segment here. Baseball practice, dude?
Yes, sir. We got baseball at 8:30. So.
All right.
Yeah.
Well,
at 9, so we got to leave at 8:30.
No, I get you. Back from the beach, back from the sun. And he shook up the college football world to return. We welcome in managing editor with Hail Varsity Magazine, hailvarsity.com, Brandon Vogel, at Brandon L. Vogel on Twitter, author with John Cook, Dream Like a Champion. I'm staring at the Hail Varsity yearbook right now. Vogues, welcome back. How was the beach? How was the sun? Anything new?
Couple of things new while I was gone. The beach was, I think we've established on this show.
You hate it?
At various points. I'm not the biggest beach fan, but because we had 14-month-old, we collectively over 2 days spent about 2 hours preparing to go to the beach and about a total of 30 minutes over 2 sessions at the beach. So good job, Max, for decreasing my beach time.
Did you get fried at all?
No, wasn't out there long enough to get fried. And of course, with the young one, pretty vigilant with the sunscreen. So luckily, just another benefit to me of having a young one in tow.
Well, there we go. So let's get your take, man, on the addition. The SEC slogan is "It just means more," right? Well, what's the Big Ten's new slogan going to be that since Hollywood's coming to the league?
Oh, good question. It's really far. I mean, that's kind of my gut reaction, you know. So when the SEC made its coup of Oklahoma and Texas, you know, one of the thoughts, and I think a lot of people were thinking like this, like, well, that's kind of it. That's like those are like the big two left, and you know, we're in a world in college athletics where it's based the SEC and the Big Ten get to go first, and meanwhile the ACC, Pac-12, and Big 12 are just kind of hoping to hang on. It's an unfortunate reality in my mind, but it is what it is. And it felt like Texas and Oklahoma were the only big two left. I mean, Notre Dame is in there. But when you talked about potential Big Ten expansion, like I wasn't even thinking about USC and UCLA because those two programs and two universities do fit the bill as big ones left. But what are you going to do? Have a conference that spans from New Jersey to California? Turns out, yeah.
And it really is incredible. And I think you nailed it, Brandon, where it's just like you didn't see that one coming. You know, you figured that the Big Ten would have some sort of response, but probably didn't think it was going to happen this summer and probably didn't think it was going to be Southern Cal. So let's take football off the table for a second because we'll have plenty of time to talk about that. But with the other sports, Which sport do you think will see the greatest impact and potentially change what current Big Ten teams do as a result of these two programs coming into the conference? What sport do you think will also get affected greatly?
It's hard because recruiting has become so national in most sports now. I mean, my gut reaction is probably baseball. So we're very familiar as people who follow Nebraska that the Huskers basically spend the first 6 weeks of the season, on the road in Texas, Arizona, or California. I think having two conference teams out there is interesting from that perspective. There's a ton of logistical questions for that. It also doesn't hurt volleyball by any means, although it might be a bigger boon to USC and UCLA. Not that, those programs have fallen off to a great degree, but women's volleyball used to be just dominated by West Coast teams. Then the Big Ten kind of rose up, and specifically Nebraska and Penn State and Texas. So I think the Big Ten was already far and away the best volleyball conference in the country, and it got stronger with the addition of those two. So I'm actually, as just a volleyball fan, I'm pretty excited about the addition of USC and UCLA for that.
Brandon, while we're talking volleyball here, I mean, you can talk all you want about potential more expansion. I think Washington and Stanford would be super exciting if they were to join the Big Ten for volleyball. But one thing I've seen is that USC and UCLA both have a men's volleyball program. Your thoughts on them joining the Big Ten? Does it bring about men's volleyball in the Big Ten?
I'm pretty interested in that. I haven't had the chance to talk to Coach Cook about that. He has obviously been an advocate for men's volleyball at Nebraska, or even he's talked about it as it would be a great fit for Omaha. But this at least opens that door. And, in boys volleyball at the high school level, largely a West Coast sport, but there is, kind of the Michigan Great Lakes region. There is boys volleyball at the high school level there. So that could be pretty interesting. And I would be a big fan of that if that were to come to pass.
Brandon Vogel with us, Hail Varsity Radio. So, Vogues, let's turn it to Nebraska football. And we're 2 years away from SC and UCLA joining. Nebraska's to-do list remains the same, doesn't it? Get better, get competitive, because you're adding UCLA is good enough to be, or at least has enough talent to be dangerous in a given year. The expectation is for USC to be a playoff team. They never cracked the playoff in the playoff era. It was Washington, and then you had the Oregon years. So is the clock even moving a little bit quicker for Nebraska to get right with these two teams coming on board?
I think so, because USC, we'll see what they become under Lincoln Riley. I mean, I think like most people, I expect them to be, if not pretty good, pretty quickly, certainly a lot better than they were during the Clay Helton years. That becomes interesting timing for Lincoln Riley, and I don't think there's much you can do from a coaching perspective. Like, his job is to get that program on its feet as quickly as possible. You can't worry about the fact that, say you do that this year. USC has a great schedule this year, by the way. But say you do that this year, and do it again, you can get a little bit better in year two. Then you got to go play in the Big Ten, sort of similar to Nebraska playing in back-to-back Big 12 championship games and then making a conference switch. We lived that all firsthand, and it ain't easy. UCLA is a little bit more middle of the road at this point. I mean, I think they're in a pretty similar spot to Nebraska, but okay, let's agree that basically USC and UCLA will come into the conference in a very similar spot Nebraska is in. Certainly not behind them, maybe ahead of them. So, Nebraska has a lot of teams ahead of it in the Big Ten to make up ground on. By the time that move happens, you might be able to add USC and UCLA to that list if Nebraska doesn't show progress of its own. So I think it does increase the urgency.
You know, the Big Ten came out and said they're standing pat right now with the addition of USC and UCLA. But, of course, there are thoughts about, what about Oregon? What about Washington? Even in Colorado? What about Stanford, Notre Dame? There's a bunch of other programs out there that might make sense, especially westward. But that in mind, do you think that USC and UCLA probably got some assurance that it would happen, that they would have some relatively local competition? Do you think they would have made this jump without that assurance?
I think it's possible they would have made the jump without the assurance. Like for schools that are in kind of the other three of the Power 5 leagues, I think there's a certain desperation here. Like if you've got a landing spot in the Tony neighborhoods of the Big Ten or the SEC, you take it and figure it out. I think it's probably it's very unlikely in my mind that conversation didn't come up. And in my view, the Big Ten, it has to add other teams in the West, because you look at this from a football perspective, like, okay, USC and UCLA are going to get their home games, but that's a sport where you're used to traveling once a week for it. And, oh, by the way, it's pretty well established in the NFL that teams jumping 2 time zones, which would be every road trip for USC and UCLA, don't perform so well against the spread. In fact, it gets worse each time zone you go over. I looked at it briefly for college football last season, and Pacific time zone teams went 1-6 straight up against Central or East Zone. So small sample size, but I'll go back and look at it in multiple years, and I suspect that holds true at the college game. For all the other sports, you're looking at, okay, every time USC or UCLA comes west, they're going to play multiple games there, or comes east, they're going to play multiple games. Every time a classic or current Big Ten team goes that direction, well, you're just going to play both of them. So, I mean, even our normal basketball schedule or volleyball at this point, with how much the Big Ten Network covers it, is scheduled for, structured around TV, so you can kind of maximize your windows. Now I think you got to almost go to a weekend or something close to it type of scheduling where you're playing 2 games in quick succession. It changes a lot.
Vogues, let's get into the next moves for the Big Ten as they're taking a breath now. Dennis Dodd reporting that Washington and Oregon told to wait over there while Notre Dame's figuring things out. What do you suspect with the Irish? What's your feel on Notre Dame? Is that the next get for the Big Ten, or is it more likely, in your opinion, to grab some more of the Pac-12?
I think Notre Dame has to see what's happening, but it really benefits the Irish because they've always been like kind of the golden egg that's out there. And, everyone would take it instantly. And they have consistently sat back and said, nope, we're Notre Dame. We do our independent thing. And like the longer they wait, the better that gets for them. So I don't see Notre Dame as the next edition we hear about for the Big Ten. Again, I think it has to be something, essentially west of Nebraska, just to make this make a little bit more sense from a scheduling perspective. And Notre Dame will have the opportunity to sit back for a little longer. It's just a matter of how long that is, because I think this kind of, if you want to call it a counter move to what the SEC did, however you want to phrase it, like it's pretty clear where this is headed. And the SEC and the Big Ten are in no way kind of relinquishing the upper hand they have on the sport of college football at this moment, and everything else kind of flows from there.
Brandon Vogel with us on Hail Varsity Radio. You just mentioned it's clear where this thing is headed, and it's funny because even going back years, there's this talk of a, like 32 teams super conferences. Is that where it is headed? Like when you hear, like I think we know both the SEC and the Big Ten in their current iteration are the ones that are going to gobble up the good teams, and like we know that. But do you have more specifics beyond that, or do you have a hunch? Are we talking about 32 team super conferences? Are we talking 24? Like, what's your gut tell you?
Yeah, so I think the hurdle, and it's always been the hurdle with college football, is, you know, as we talk about in a lot of phases, because it touches everything in the sport, is there's just no central authority. And so I have a hard time seeing basically us having a college football league, for example, where it's, you know, the top 50 or 60 teams. Maybe we'll get there. It seems closer to reality now than ever before. But the SEC makes so much money kind of looking out for its interests. The Big Ten does the same. Are those two ever going to give that up and say, well, if we do it together and we bring in, you know, we have the in crowd, however big that gets, whatever other schools you want to invite to the party, and then you basically just have a de facto pro league, which I like from a clarity perspective. Like, college football, I've come to really love the mess that it is, but it'd be nice if you can have, say, 40 teams. You're like, okay, well, we've got the 10 westernmost teams, and whoever wins that grouping goes into the playoff. You know, it just makes sense, like the way all other sports work, literally. But I just don't know if how long it's going to take for the Big Ten to finally say, okay, like we've maximized what we can do on our own. Let's start talking to the SEC and whatever other conferences are left at that point, and see if we can squeeze even more money out of this thing by doing it together.
Yeah, and Brandon, I'm not sure if that's going to be 5 years down the road or 20 years down the road, but it is coming. In the shorter term, though, I mean, what the Big Ten has done with this move with USC and UCLA is they've added another huge TV market, and they now control 6 of the top 8 TV markets in the United States, the 2 remaining being that San Francisco and Oakland metro area and the Dallas-Fort Worth metro area. Do you think it's more likely in the short term that when the Big Ten goes back for more expansion, are they going to try to add these next 2 TV markets? Do you think they're going to add schools that make sense from a football and athletic point of view?
Probably. I think we're at a point where, you know, USC and UCLA and Los Angeles itself, that was kind of the biggest chip left on the table. So at this point, I think we're looking more at a kind of a fit a type of thing. And we've seen the Big Ten do both. You know, Rutgers was largely a TV market. Maryland, maybe not quite to that degree, but pretty much. Nebraska and Penn State were more of what I would call "quote unquote" fit additions when the Big Ten made those. So we've seen them go both. We've seen them be pretty smart. I think, you know, whatever you think about Rutgers and Maryland in the Big Ten, it certainly increased their earning potential, the conference's earning potential. So I think it achieved its objective there. So I think at this point you're looking mostly towards fit. You know, if we're talking about the remaining Pac-10 teams, I guess, starting in 2024, Oregon makes a ton of sense. That's, you know, a school like Nebraska that's not located necessarily in a huge TV market, but has a really passionate fan base, has strong athletic programs across the board. Washington, you know, I know the Big Ten has technically told them to hold on, or reportedly told them to hold on, but those two make the most sense. You start looking outside of that in the Pac-10, and, you know, Stanford and Cal don't add as much kind of athletic prestige, but I don't think you can totally rule out the academic piece of this when you're talking about the Big Ten either.
Vogues, do you anticipate the roadblock being real with Washington and Oregon from an Oregon State and Washington State perspective? The local politicians and governments make it real hard for Washington and Oregon to make that next move if the little brother isn't brought along?
I mean, I think local politicians can attempt to make it hard. I mean, if you know, it is true that Oregon and Washington not instantly, but pretty close, reached out to the Big Ten. That tells you how they feel about those particular, about the importance of maintaining those. I'm not saying it's not important, but, it's kind of, okay, if we could go to the Big Ten, would we give up playing Oregon State every year? Or maybe you find a way to keep that. That told me that those schools, at least, are willing to look at maybe giving up those rivalries. And, this was the case with Oklahoma and Oklahoma State for a long time, and Oklahoma's going to the SEC. So I think there'd be some resistance, but I don't think it's a deal breaker or a roadblock by any means.
How many really, truly good programs are out there left to be absorbed? When we talk about combination of brand, you bring something financially, and you don't suck on the field.
Oregon is certainly that, and when you look at, their excellence really across all sports, I think that only adds to it. We know, you can start with football. I think Washington's pretty close. Colorado athletics would have been one for me probably 10 years ago, but I'm not sure that it has totally found its footing in the Pac-12 to the point where, if it were me just drafting teams, I'd look pretty hard at Utah, maybe even ahead of Colorado at this point. And, you've got a really concentrated and devoted fan base with Utah too, which I think we've seen in their move to a Power 5 league, and then you get into the program. I think we all know Kansas's football history, right? I think Kansas still, based on basketball, and if they can just get that football program to a point where it's, consistently competitive instead of the worst Power 5 team not named Vanderbilt, and maybe even worse than Vanderbilt lately. Kansas is still a good get. Oklahoma State remains one. Then you move into the Big 12. And then, of course, the ACC, which is the big wild card in this. It's hanging together for now, but most, the big, and, we haven't even talked about this for the Big 10 yet, but, I think the big kind of unopened frontier for them is finding a way to get into the South. So you look at a North Carolina, Duke, again, a basketball school. Clemson is obviously out there. You've got the Florida schools in the ACC. That's the missing piece for the Big Ten, I think, is now it's got to get to the South. And I would look pretty hard at those schools who in the ACC might be willing to make the jump, because it becomes a little bit of liar's poker here, who's going to move first.
Yeah, but Georgia Tech, you could see potentially. It's going to be really interesting. Hey, real quick, Brandon, to more stuff germane about Nebraska's actual football team. Nuruddin Nouili, I'm probably pronouncing that wrong, presumably one of the starting guards for Nebraska, suspended for an entire year for substance abuse, and he comes out and admits it. What does that do to Nebraska's offensive line picture? There's been a lot of talk about tackles and what you're going to do there, but what does this do overall for Nebraska? And do you think maybe they turn one of those tackles, move one of those guys inside?
Yeah, Corcoran has kind of been painted as the potential swing guy. So even before this, Nouili's suspension, where Corcoran ended up was kind of the key to the whole thing. But even more than that, and I thought this, before that news came last week, Nebraska has a lot of chips on Teddy Prohaska getting back to full health, which I think, will happen, of course, and being kind of what we saw in a limited sample size. Now, with a spot open at guard, it looks like, okay, well, that's a potential spot for Corcoran now. It accentuates how good I think Nebraska needs Prohaska to be, how good to fill in at center, which for right now looks like Hickson could be. It just ups the, I think, ante on what this offensive line has to do for Nebraska to get where it needs to go, because it was a presumed starter who's now gone.
Vogues, have a great 4th of July weekend. Enjoy time with family, bud. Thanks for jumping on with us and taking time today.
You too, guys. Thanks a lot.
There he is,
Appreciate
Brandon
it,
Vogel. Cranack, have a great 4th with the fam, brother.
Appreciate it. You too. And we will chat next week, my man.
All right, there he is. Mark Cranack, quick timeout. We'll check in with the Iron Horse. Gary Sharp's next. Hail Varsity, presented by the Nebraska Lottery. Hello, listener. Hey, it's Chris Schmidt with Hail Varsity Radio, and I wanted to let you know about a special deal just for listeners of the Hail Varsity Radio Show podcast. We're offering $10 off the annual subscription price. That means that you can get everything we do. 10 issues of our monthly magazine, our annual football yearbook, and all the premium content we produce at HailVarsity.com. Just go to HailVarsity.com/subscribe and enter in the promo code GBR for $10 off a full year of Hail Varsity. That's HailVarsity.com/subscribe, promo code GBR.
Glad to have you back.
Yes, sir. You heard me right.
Here are the guys, Schmidt and Cranack.
Well, Hector, here's the game plan. You're going to bring us 2 absolute martinis. You know how I like them, straight up. And then precisely 7½ minutes after that, you're going to bring us 2 more. Then 2 more after that every 5 minutes until one of us passes out. Excellent strategy, sir.
Well, we are holding off on the martinis till 9 a.m. Central Time. Chris Schmidt, Elijah Herbal, Cranack off to hit grounders. Bless his heart. We welcome in the Iron Horse, Gary Sharp. Sharpie, good morning. Happy 4th of July weekend, bud.
Hey, good morning to you guys, and happy 4th of July as well. I can't believe that it's already July 2nd.
You blink, and we are here, and then it's media days, and then it's Ireland. It's accelerated, and the change in college football accelerated. Quite a bombshell. Not that we all thought there was going to be more movement in college football, Gary, but wow, this really came out of nowhere, and SC and UCLA moving east, sort of, kind of. What do you think?
Well, it's, to some it might be surprising, but when you think about the landscape and the future of college athletics, it's really not. Now, USC made perfect sense. UCLA, you needed a dance partner. I think both of those schools, and USC is a national brand. There's this nostalgia. There's old money there. Even though they haven't been as successful in football, it is still USC. And USC is the pillar of the Pac-10, now the Pac-12. But when you're looking at the SEC and you're looking at the Big Ten and you're hearing about all this money that they're making, Rutgers is making, Vanderbilt is making, and you're like, we're the USC. We are in a conference where the Pac-12 network has completely fallen apart. We are not getting paid what we think we should. Yeah, you start to look around and you think, okay, we're in a decaying conference. Let's see where we can go. And the Big Ten and USC and UCLA got together, and we saw what I think, a year ago, it was a big deal for Texas, Oklahoma. USC and UCLA leaving the Pac-12 to come to the Big Ten is bigger than that. It trumps it. We're talking about nearly 100 years of a conference where the mainstays, they take off. Your Los Angeles market leaves, and it leaves your conference devastated. I like conference realignment. I used to subscribe to, this is what makes college great. But then the Big 8 morphed into the Big 12, and a team in the Big 12 moved into the Big 10. And you have to adapt or you're going to die. And Nebraska's in a good spot. Nebraska has a nice table, a nice seat at the Big Ten table, but it's not over. I mean, there's all kinds of moving parts that are going to go on, and I think eventually, we've talked about it plenty of times, Schmitty and Elijah, and when Mark was on, we're headed to the haves and the have-nots having more separation, and maybe we are going to finally get to the finale of 4 16-team conferences, or whatever it becomes, 4 20-team conferences, where they make up their own rules. That's where we're headed. And the Big Ten, in this case, they're headed to the Big 16.
Gary Sharp's with us, Hail Varsity Radio. I was reading some of Trev's comments with the World Herald with Sam and then with Sip and On 3, and he's talking about, getting comfortable, being uncomfortable, and just the fact that Nebraska, to your point, is at that big table. And Gary, how hypothetically, how we started talking about this. I mean, Nebraska's just the best way to put it is blessed. Not that it doesn't offer its own fan base, eyeballs, passion. It totally does, and it offers that history of brand that was built up with Devaney and Osborne, and how tough a sell. Think about being Nebraska, man, right now if you were still in the Big 12 trying to find a landing spot. And I'm not saying that you're going to be 3-9 in the Big 12. Your record would probably be better, but, man, think about being someone out in the ocean trying to find a raft.
Yeah, and you know what? You would have probably already moved. Because Nebraska, the Nebraska, despite the struggles on the football field and the struggles in other sports, Nebraska is still a national brand. And I said this yesterday on my show. There's already a sense of urgency. And yesterday's or Thursday's moves reiterated that Nebraska needs to start acting like the national brand they are. They have resources. They have good people that want to support the program. They have, I believe, good structure in place right now. They need to get things turned around quickly and assert themselves as a national brand, because California for recruiting has opened up. Californians for Nebraskans are elated. Trips out to the Rose Bowl, to the Coliseum, they're on the horizon. So the clock ticking on Nebraska has moved forward a little bit with the addition of USC or UCLA, because, and that's Trev's used that line for a long time. He's used it plenty of times in conversation with me about, how he looks at his athletic department and doing things the right way is you got to be, you got to be uncomfortable, doing the comfortable. It's a time where I think Nebraska has a great opportunity here. Yes, they're going to make a lot of money, but Nebraska also has to move forward, and they got to move forward quickly, which just continues. Doesn't it seem like, Schmitty, everything circles back to the most dramatic football season that we've ever encountered in Nebraska is what is going to begin 8 weeks from today.
Yeah. I mean, you look at the future and the urgency for sure. I mean, that's, last year was pressurized a bit in Champaign. How do you start, right? Can you finally kind of break through? Well, it's 10 times the pressure and even 10 times the road trip to Dublin to get things kicked off.
Yeah, it's, and you got to be ready to go right away. I think this whole thing, the movement, Nebraska's got a seat, but Nebraska needs to make sure that that's a cushion seat. It's not a hard seat, that they've got to be able to move up a couple of chairs, and it all starts with football. But I wasn't like, oh, my gosh, college sports is ending. They're still going to find a way to keep regional rivalries. It's just there's more people involved. But this has been going on. We're a decade into this, and this was a seismic shift for the importance of two programs leaving the Pac-12 to come to the Big Ten. Now the next step, as you've discussed, is what does Notre Dame do? Notre Dame has a lot of leverage, but now the Big Ten, which you can play that national schedule that Notre Dame clamors to have because you're going from sea to shining sea, now Notre Dame to the Big Ten looks even more enticing, but they've got all the leverage in the world, because if they leave their football out of the ACC, I think it completely devastates the ACC.
Yeah, Gary, it feels like more Big Ten expansion is more of a question of when than if. So I want to get your take. Is this going to be something where we're talking about more expansion from the Big Ten a month from now? Or is this going to be something where they sign a new media rights deal with USC and UCLA and cross the bridge of more expansion down the road at a later date?
Well, so I know, you get to 16 and you're thinking, okay, how do you get to 20? Who's going to come? And you start rattling off Oregon and Washington and Notre Dame and, maybe there's one other team. I'm curious, if you were going to do this, wouldn't you bring all the Pac-12 teams that you were interested in at once? So they all get out where they don't have to pay that substantial penalty in a couple of years. So I know that there's probably more additions, but I'm not on the train of, oh, my God, it's going to happen quickly. Notre Dame is the wild card on what Notre Dame's going to do. And then if Notre Dame says yes, then you probably have to go to 20. But I don't know. At 16 right now, I think that's where they're going to be. Because here's the thing, guys. And you can go through every team that would be viable. Does it make sense? Does it make sense to add Oregon? Does it make sense to add Washington? Are you just adding Washington to get the Seattle market? Do you need the Seattle market? You've already got 5 of the top 7 TV markets in the country. How much more TV money can you make? And how much more of your current members, they want to spread the money around? You know, there's only so much money. As enormous as it is, there's only so much money. So does people want to start sharing? Or does an Oregon and Washington say to the Big Ten, hey, we'd love to join you, and we don't need a full share like USC and UCLA are going to get? I'm sure there's a lot of moving parts, but I'm actually, with Notre Dame on the outside, and they're the wild card, 16 to me sounds good right now.
It's interesting. You get that we bring value and brand and eyeballs in a number 2 TV market. I mean, it was just a perfect win-win with SC and UCLA, Gary. That's the math right now, isn't it? Is finding who's gonna make us some money versus cost the members money with this new TV deal. What's going to help enhance the renegotiation? I'm interested in the timeline here because you're still kind of gliding right now versus sticking the landing with the new Big Ten rights, because you'll no doubt, I would think, have everything figured out with what your league's going to be with the new TV rights deal. If it stays at 16 or if you are going to go to 20 or 18, that's got to be figured out beforehand versus adding after, right? I mean, that's the progression of this order, correct?
Yeah, certainly. And here's the thing. We can all play fantasy realignment. It's whatever Fox wants right now.
Yeah.
If Fox says, we're good, we got LA, we got 16, let's move forward, that's what they're going to do. I mean, this is the mega power ESPN versus the mega power Fox. So if Fox says, nope, we're not stopping at 16, then they're going to expand. But again, how much of that enormous pie do people want to split up that are already in the conference? And for some schools, i.e. Nebraska, that had to wait before they got a full share. I mean, it sounds like USC and UCLA are getting a full share right away. So, you know, there's a lot of back and forth and logistics going on, but the power player here is Fox. And then the power player is ESPN with the SEC, because don't you think that the SEC now goes, okay, here's our counter move.
Yep.
What are you doing, Clemson? What are you doing, Florida State? We kicked the tires with you last year. How about we do more than kick the tires this year? That's the fascinating part of me is not what happens to the ACC, which I think is in a lot of trouble, or the Pac-12, or the Big 12. It's what is the next move by the SEC to counter what the Big Ten did yesterday. And we just grow closer to two conferences running college football. And really, if you think about it, guys, does the SEC and the Big Ten need anybody else? Do they need the other conferences? I don't think so.
Mm-mm.
Gary Sharp is with us here on a Saturday morning edition of Hail Varsity Radio. And Gary, shifting gears here just a little bit, semi-serious question. I think one of the most interesting aspects of USC and UCLA joining the party is how it's going to open up recruiting not only in California but along the West Coast as a whole. So if, say, Notre Dame is in the boat, do you think that the Big Ten goes down to Texas, open up the Texas frontier, and get a school like TCU, not only to open up the TV market, but also to open up recruiting, and third, to bring a natural foil to Notre Dame and get you that Catholics versus Protestants rivalry?
I see what you're doing there. Well, you can say, hey, let's see if Miami wants to come. You know, the thing about, like, California, a lot of the Big Ten schools, including Nebraska, already recruit there. So it's just another layer to, hey, you can tell a recruit maybe every other year we're going to be playing in California, that mom and dad can come watch you play. You know, you've got to have the connections in California. But it definitely, the footprint of the Big Ten, which is already strong from the recruiting angle, if you look where Big Ten schools are going in, like outside of Ohio State, which just goes everywhere, including Uzbekistan, to get players. You know, the Big Ten's in a good spot, but it does open that up. But what does it do? Now, think about this on the other flip side, guys. What does it do for a Lincoln Riley recruiting? He's a recruiting machine, and he can step outside of California, and now he can go into the Big Ten blueprint and sell USC. So it's going to be fascinating. But there's one thing for sure. that when this starts, when those two programs join your league, and I like how we're just kicking UCLA football to the side, which they haven't been relevant since Terry Donahue was walking up and down the sidelines, is you better be ready to go or you're going to get passed by. And especially not knowing how schedules, divisions, pods, no divisions going to be set up, you could get lost really quickly. And I think we will see, here's the negative of this, is there will be some current Big Ten football programs, and they're kind of already this way, that you know what, to not be good is pretty lucrative. You're still getting paid.
That's just it. How long does that stay? Or do you get booted out Premier League style? Sharpie, when we talk scheduling, what do you want to see for Nebraska? How often do you want to see SC Nebraska, UCLA? It was magical till kickoff when SC came to Memorial Stadium. Nebraska's had a great run in history of series with UCLA throughout the decades. But what's the reality for Nebraska as part of that must-see TV when we factor in the already existing chance to play Michigan or Ohio State, and then the Midwest showdowns with Iowa and Wisconsin and Minnesota? What's that look like from Trev's standpoint?
Well, I think if you're looking at the California corridor in the city of Los Angeles, and you know what it was like in 2006 when hordes of Nebraska fans went out to the Coliseum, or the times that Nebraska has gone to play UCLA or even in 2001 playing in the Rose Bowl, people show up. I mean, they got the huge collection of Californians for Nebraska. And then you've got people that it's a direct flight. You can hop on a plane in Omaha and you can fly directly into Los Angeles. I think ideally with USC and UCLA, every year Nebraska's playing one of them. Either you're going to Los Angeles or they're coming here. I think that's the most ideal setup for Nebraska. But guys, that's the next part of untangling all of this is what does the schedule look like? We were talking about the 3 versus 6 model, and you get 3 regional rivalries and they stay, and then you mix in the rest over a 4-year period. I mean, do you still get your 3 or do they go pods? That's going to be the tricky part of how do you schedule. But if you're at 16, it's a lot easier to do it with the pod kind of mentality. If you go to 20, you could still do it. But I think only 16 and 20. But I think because of where Nebraska is located, I think you're gonna find possibly a Nebraska, Iowa, UCLA, USC kind of pod in there. And wouldn't that be fun to see USC or UCLA come to Lincoln in late November?
I'd dig it. They might not.
Yeah, here's the other thing. You're going to have to, if you're on the West Coast, and, neither one of those programs pack their stadium. They're fair weather fans. They're going to have to get used to playing in the snow and the rain, and Big Ten teams are going to have to get used to playing, in some cases, empty stadiums, where the passion is not as great as it is in Lincoln or Columbus or elsewhere. And then you have the 9 a.m. kickoffs. You're going to be playing, if you're a West Coast team, you're going to be playing at 9 a.m. Or who is that first Big Ten coach that complains because they're kicking off at 8 o'clock out on the West Coast and they're not getting home until 2 or 3 in the morning? Or better yet, how about when Michigan State and USC play at the Galen Center on the campus of USC and tip-off is 10 p.m. Eastern?
Gary, just to take a slightly different angle here to wrap, a little over a minute left, what does this do to Big Ten baseball?
Here's what I think happens to Big Ten baseball, guys. I think with the movement here, and remember there are a group of 5 conferences, there are like the Big East that does not have football. I think we just took a step closer to regional conferences for non-revenue Olympic sports, not named football, men's and women's basketball.
Okay.
Maybe even volleyball. I mean, the Big Ten loaded in volleyball, and you add those two. I think for cost measures, I think a regional conference for those kind of sports makes sense. Because does it make sense for UCLA to fly all the way across the country, play a 3-game series at Rutgers, and because you have to catch a flight at noon on Sunday, you have a curfew? I think it makes better sense to stay regional. You can still have a championship. You wouldn't be under this is the Big Ten baseball, but you can still get NCAA berths and all that. I think that's another discussion that's being held by not only the big boys, but also some of the other conferences that don't have football that can supplement travel. But, man, the travel budgets are going to go up, and you have to address that. And I think that's one area where you can help your travel budget is if you can get regional conferences for, like, baseball and softball.
Gary Sharp, the Iron Horse. Sharpie, enjoy your 4th of July with family and friends. We'll get caught up again. Thanks for the time this morning.
Hey, thank you once again. Everybody stay safe out there. And once again, congratulations, Smitty, on your honor as a Sportscaster of the Year.
Well, I appreciate you, Sharpie, for everything, man.
Hey,
all right,
guys.
Take care. There he is, Gary Sharp. Good stuff from Elijah. We're off Monday. Back at it Tuesday with Hail Varsity, presented by the Nebraska Lottery.
A Hurrdat Media Production.